Hello, and welcome to Strange Dominions, where we attempt to unlock the mysteries behind the unseen and unheard, unknown and unknowable. I am your host, Octavian Graves. Tonight, Ian and I speak with Andrew the Wanderer. Andrew has had a plethora of very strange encounters, ranging from gnomes, lizard people, Bigfoot, and much, much more. We had a few technical issues while Andrew was trying to tell his story, so there are some subtle cuts here and there. We did the best we could. If you've seen something strange or unusual, such as a cryptid, spirit, UFO, or anything in between, please send us an email at strangedominionspodcast@gmail.com. If you are enjoying the content we are making, would like to support us, and get extra content and episodes, you can sign up for our Patreon starting at just $4 a month. You get extra episodes, ad-free episodes, merchandise, and much more. The link for that will be in the description below. With all that being said, we bring you our interview with Andrew the Wanderer. Okay, tonight Ian and I are speaking with Andrew the Wanderer. How you doing, Andrew?
I'm doing wonderful, gentlemen. How are you?
Very good.
Yeah, we're doing well. So where are you calling us from?
I am calling you from the Pacific Northwest, specifically Kenmore, Washington.
Now, that's a place that, I think both of us can agree is one of the weirdest places for this sort of phenomena. We get a lot of stories and reports going back a long time in the Pacific Northwest about all kinds of weird things, especially one of our favorite topics of discussion, which is hairy monsters, or, as you might know, Bigfoot.
So wherever I know
Agreed.
you said that you had a couple different things happen to you, so wherever you want to start, go right ahead.
Okay. Well, first couple experiences I had were when I was experiencing homelessness in Seattle in 2017, early 2017. This was just off of Alaskan Way before they had tore down the viaduct. To kind of like a highway freeway. For anybody who's local, they know what I'm talking about. There was an individual, it would have been about noon, and this individual, older white, and I saw an older gentleman who was at least older, maybe older 60s. You could smell the wealth on this gentleman because he had a brand new white Mercedes-Benz that had just come out that year. This individual, I noticed something was really quite odd when I was able to get a look at his eyes. He would not look at me eye to eye. I tried. He would look around, but it was his pupils. He had his eyes looked crimson red, if only for just a few moments, no more than a second and a half, 2 seconds. And then his eyes there's a very, very fast shift. So this individual his eyes had this kind of shift to them. His his lips had this slight kind of shift to them, very, very subtle. And it had his body language took a very predatory kind of energy and appearance to it, very, 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 very subtle. I'm assuming he was, this dude clearly creeped me out. So I basically could only look for so long. And then I got so frightened, I got the hell out of there. I just went and hung out in the park a couple blocks away. That's one experience, but at the same terminal, about a week or two later, I was going to meet another individual because we were going to go to a homeless feed that morning to get some, work in the kitchen to get some coffee and things like that for our trouble.
Yeah.
But we saw someone else who was very much under the influence of drugs. That's kind of a thing in big cities like Seattle. This individual was a bit younger, but was, I want to assume, something of the greater Asian culture. I don't know what specific form of Asian, but this individual, very similar eyes, was not hiding it, and would flick his tongue around as if he was hunting. The guy stunk to high heaven, like he hadn't showered in forever, but he had the same kind of eyes on him as that other wealthier man had, only he was being much more like I could care less. And he would flick his tongue left to right, like he was tasting the air looking. Me and my friend could not get him to make eye contact with us. We literally got in front of this guy. He literally trying to keep him from getting in front of us and going past us. He would not look at us. He just kind of like grunt and like move. Wouldn't do much else. So like,
Now,
we're looking at each other, freaking out a little bit, going, dude, is this really happening? Is this really happening right now in the middle of Seattle, the ferry terminal in broad epic daylight?
that is intense. Yeah. Can I ask a question?
Yeah. Sure. I'm shaking here a little bit.
It's all right. We got you. Now, you had mentioned the first man looked more well-off and wealthy. And was he wearing a suit?
He was. So if you know anything about rainy cities or cities that it's very difficult to keep white clothes white.
Right.
This guy literally, that's what I'm saying, you could smell the money on him. It looked like he had never had a drop of dirt ever touch this dude. Even his shoes were pristine when he got out of the car. Everything on this dude was absolutely pristine.
Interesting. Now, the second man, how was his appearance? Did he look more generic or wealthy, or did he?
Me and my friend were homeless, but this dude was way worse off than us.
Okay, so he looked more derelict.
Considerably more. We're talking proper, disheveled, unkept, and it just all around unpleasant.
Okay, well, continue. I just wanted to
those are the
get a little more details
of what I would say witnessing reptilian beings. I want to say almost a year later, wasn't quite 2018 yet.
Before you go on, what was the time frame between the two encounters?
A couple weeks, maybe a month.
It was fairly close in time to each other.
Yeah.
All right. Because, oftentimes true encounters, can happen back to back or in the space of a few weeks. But there is no real set, doesn't have to happen in a certain time frame. Sometimes people will see things, over the course of several weeks in mass and then nothing for years. And then they might have another series of encounters. But
yeah.
I am just trying to get a handle on, get the whole picture of what's going on.
This was before Seattle's viaduct project went underway. The viaduct is no longer there. It's been removed. It's been torn down. But anyway, yeah, this was right in the middle of tourist season, as best as I can remember, so between spring and summer, because there was a lot of people around.
Okay. Now, just a few auxiliary questions about that to get your mind back into that zone, just on the first two encounters you had. Do you remember any other, perhaps unrelated, strange things? I know, being homeless and in that state can kind of make your whole life kind of in survival mode. I've been in those situations in the past myself.
Okay, go on.
But do you recall any other thing that comes to mind around that time? Dreams, encounters, even things that might seem completely unrelated.
Something very similar. It's crazy because I almost want to assume they are related, but there was this very feeling in the air before those two experiences took place. This feeling, this shift in the air that, anybody who has any sense of a heightened awareness can just get this feeling, something in the air, something has just shifted, and it's not quite right. Where if you've ever been out in the wild and you've ever had any experience with predatory animals,
yes,
you know when you're being hunted. That is the experience sensation as best as I can akin it to, because I am not a hunter. I don't have that experience.
So just to make a note, Octavian, we have an upcoming, it might be the next episode, will be a live episode where we went to a place called Gazoo's Woods, seeing if we could encounter some of the entities or phenomena that had been encountered there before. And in one certain spot, and for listeners, you can you'll be able to know, but I used that exact, and we had used that exact phraseology of that note of being out in the woods and
Yeah,
being
it's a
hunted.
very physical feeling.
And that exact term.
It's
Yeah,
pretty
very
unmistakable.
visceral terror.
Yep.
So yeah, just go on with any other stories you have.
All right, so it was less than a year later. It wasn't 2018 yet. I same person that I had the experience with the second witnessing of the unshoveled one with reptilian eyes, I guess we could say. Same person and I had been walking around Seattle, spent the day walking all over the place. Kind of what happens when you're on the streets of Seattle. You walk all over the place. We found ourselves in Capitol Hill, working our way over to Volunteer Park, and we were just because the apple trees and stuff were kind of in blossom and bloom. We do get a bit of wild apple trees out here and stuff. Well, we're going through just clearly brushing up on our foraging and things like that. We make a good day of it, and it gets close to, I want to say we must have been in Volunteer Park for a number of hours, because when we came back, it was dark. But when we went there, it was still, mid-afternoon. So we'd been there for a few hours. Anyway, on our way back, we witnessed a gnome. That's the only way I can describe it, a gnome. Now, this guy must have been no more than a foot tall, maybe, a foot tall, and had a hat, one of the little pointed hats, almost as tall as himself, had a very, I almost want to, like, I'm trying to look for the color green that I can describe out here, but it's almost like a faded evergreen, if you would, if that makes sense, was the color of his kind of shirt tunic, and like some, I want to say, dirty gray brown pants. He looked at us quickly, like inhumanly fast, made it across the street, and went into, you're probably gonna think I'm crazy for saying this, but we watched this dude. I checked this crap. I've made a sketch of what this dude walked into. But anyway, this guy, this little bugger, straight up walked into what looks like a place where you would put a post to put a mailbox, right? It was like a post without a mailbox. So there's no post, there's no mailbox on that post, and then right next to it, there's another spot where it looks like you would put another post for a mailbox, only there's no post there. On the ground, it looks like a little thing that it's got a little screw on it, holding it in place, and you can actually push it aside with your finger, like swivel it aside on your finger. I did this with this individual. My friend was there. We did this. We went up to the spot where we saw this gnome disappear. We swiveled this little thing that's about 4 times the size of a 50-cent piece, if you know what that looks like, circumference-wise.
What is, you mentioned like a thing. Could you describe that a little more? I'm trying to get a mental picture.
It's almost like a covering where you would, I'm assuming actually it looked like it might have been an old ventilation cover at one point, but it doesn't make any sense to me because it's too small and it's not connected to the sewer. It looks like where there may have been an old flag post or something like that, old mailbox post at decades past. But it has since been covered over with some sort of something probably no thicker than a 1/4 inch thick, and about the circumference of about, it's like 4 or 5 times the size of a 50-cent piece around. So it's not too big, but big enough that, it's a little different.
Okay.
It didn't have any special markings on it. It had one flathead, one antique flathead screw in it, and I could literally push it off. I remember swiveling it all the way counterclockwise, all the way up till it was completely open. And this is what creeps me and my friend out to this day when we talk about it. There were literally little dirty stairs leading down into something.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating.
Yeah, that's really crazy.
We went back there a couple years later, all gone. It's not there. It's as if it was never there. We've checked every one of those streets. We're a couple of Virgos, so we're effing meticulous, if you know what I mean.
Yes. The Virgo crowd is not one for
They're
leaving
hard
detail
to get by,
out.
okay? They're hard to get details that we don't catch.
It's true. Now that is fascinating, and now my mind is racing with all sorts of stories about the little people, especially gnomes that I've heard. And so you're describing essentially a post hole with almost like a latch or a cover that you could move.
Yeah, like a swivel latch, like a literal swivel latch.
Oh, wow, that is...
showed up when this person needed to get out of Dodge. And then when we try to show up a few months later, a couple of years later, it's all gone. There's nothing there. I'm like, wait a minute. We know we were here because we remember. We're like, wait a minute. That's the apple tree we got like a couple fat kids on. Are you serious? Like, it was unreal.
That sounds...
And did you have any other like encounters similar to this with like gnomes or little people, or was this just like kind of like a one-off?
This was a one-off.
Okay.
This was definitely a one-off.
All right. So I have a couple questions. If you want me to ask you questions now or wait until all your stories are out, up to you.
We can Q&A real quick. I don't mind.
Okay. So what you're basically saying is that you saw a gnome in the middle of like downtown Seattle?
Oh, no. Capitol Hill.
Oh, Capitol Hill. Okay.
I think this would have been just off of, actually, I think this was 11th or 12th Avenue. 11th or 12th Avenue, like, if you follow the street, you're going to literally run right into Volunteer Park, and it's a massive park in Capitol Hill. I think it goes between 11th or 12th and 15th Avenue.
Okay, so this wasn't in like
shares a border with the cemetery.
So this wasn't in like a big like a city. It was like in a park in a city. So it was still like in a kind of a forested area.
No. This was in a wealthier neighborhood. Right by a well-known park. See, Capitol Hill, at least the area by Volunteer Park, is very wealthy houses, very expensive area of town. But it is definitely heavily occupied, meaning people live there.
Okay, all right. And so, did you notice its demeanor when it saw you or you saw it?
Oh yeah, it didn't. It seemed like it was just kind of off doing it, trotting along, doing his own little thing, and waddling specifically took these extremely quick waddling steps. Once he noticed that, didn't make the startled motion or freeze or anything, just looked at us and then immediately darted for the escape hatch, I guess we could call it.
That is fascinating. I do have a question.
Anytime.
Did you notice its eyes by any chance?
No, it was dark enough that I couldn't see anything. It did have go figure, stereotypical white facial hair.
Okay.
So this was like a really like a stereotypical. It wasn't just like a small human being. It was just like a very like archetypal gnome.
Well, yes and no. There was something very creepy and very uneasy about it. So I can't just say stereotypical gnome.
What was its skin? You said it was dark, so you might not have a clear image of it. But can you describe its skin, like color and texture?
I want to say like white people who live on the streets, very similar, dirty.
Okay, kind of.
So but would you say his base color was like white, like Caucasian?
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
But he just had a lot of dirt on him.
Definitely a little on the paler side if we're going to say that.
Okay, it's just there are other reports of entities like this, specifically like gnomes, and it's good to get all the questions down. And sometimes when you're asked them, you think of things you hadn't thought about since the encounter. But no, that's fascinating. Now, were there any other things you remember about this account, or was that mostly the whole of it?
The only thing I remember afterwards, this particular detail, it came out of like the one thing me and my friend could, to this day, can't seem to figure out is had we witnessed what they call, like, I guess you could call it, well, forest magic, like some next level stuff,
What do you mean?
Like, did that gnome do some sort of magic to make that little thing appear, that escape hatch? And then when we tried to show up X amount, of time later, it was nowhere to be found, no matter how hard we looked and where we looked. It was gone. I was wondering, I was like, some sort of concealment spell? I mean, it just depends. yeah, we can't get an answer to it. We're just wondering, like,
There's
does sucker jump
there's
dimensions on us or something?
there's a word, oftentimes, particularly fairy magic or magic that conceals, might be called a glamour. And
Oh,
fae of all types are often, their magic is often called a glamour, or
right.
the ability to create an illusion around something, or to change, basically, cast an illusion over something to make it appear differently or not there at all. Like, there are old tales about, people being visiting fairy, or being led to the other world of fairy, and they witness a great, uh, underground palace of luxury, and chandeliers, and gold and all that. But when something happens, oftentimes that glamour fades, and it's like an old filthy cavern with mushrooms and things like that. Or you have a beautiful fairy princess, and the glamour fades, and it's like an old, like a gnomish crone, things like that. Or
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense.
so maybe that word you were looking for is glamour.
That
So,
could
all
be
right,
weird.
that's an interesting story. Now, I know that's not the only encounters and experiences you've had. Now, but you're kind of telling us in timeline order, right?
Yeah, you guys are reading my mind. You're pretty good on that. I'm based on, because I've had experiences all the way up to a few days ago.
That's exciting.
That's why I'm trying to literally bring you guys up to speed as best as I can, and see if we can get it, for your sake and listeners' sake, see if we can try to get it done within an hour.
Well, like I said, we'll do a main show and then a patron show. So you got about.
Okay.
You'll
Yeah,
have.
we're here as long as you need. We'll be here for when you're done, you're done.
All
You
right.
don't have to condense. You just
So,
if this is really your first time sharing these
yeah,
stories,
it's my
take as
very
much
first time coming
time.
forward.
Take as much time as you need, and if there's anything that you remember after that's important, feel free to share it.
All right.
So yeah, don't feel
I don't
constrained.
remember much after the gnome experience. None of those anymore. 2018 rolls around. Another friend of mine is no longer with us. Passed before the pandemic and all that. Street life took him. That's what happens. You live on the street eventually. You can get sick and die from being on the street. Anyway,
It's unfortunate.
this individual. This is going to sound like a bad joke. It's not a joke. This individual introduced me to my future ex-wife. Not a joke. I divorced her this past December 5th for domestic violence and fentanyl abuse. So, but she was
Sorry to hear
present
that.
during experience. She was actually present during an experience in August. But she also was partially present during an experience that she said she saw my reaction. She didn't see what I was reacting to. But anyway, 2018, I think it was 2018 or 2019. Can't quite remember. I want to say more towards 2019, winter of 2019, but it has a tendency to that would be like January, early January, where it's raining or snowing out here. We were living in Burien at the time, Burien, Washington. I was on a little property. I was no longer on the streets. I was with her. And are you guys ever heard of what's a shadow person, a shadow being?
Of course.
Okay. Well, I was listening to, if you've ever heard of a podcast called The Facts by howtohunt.com.
That's familiar, but I don't think I've ever listened to it personally.
Steve has this individual. Steve shares a lot of individuals who mail in experiences about the Sabe, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, and that they're actually not the great North American ape, but they're actually an ancient tribe of people. But and he's gotten thousands and thousands of emails, and you will literally read them. So yeah, I have learned a lot from his listeners as well. There was another guy because I couldn't figure out what was happening and some of the things that have been. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. The shadow being, it was raining pretty good that night too. We were talking about something. I had the living room blinds open so that I could just kind of look outside, and the backyard, the back courtyard was lit because we're in this apartment complex. And I witnessed something that was moving so fast, like when your eyes are trying to literally catch up to something, and it's moving so fast, only the corner of your eye can keep up with it as it's moving. That's how fast this effort was moving.
That's, again, I've heard things like that before, and myself, I believe I've witnessed things along those lines, and it's often the fact that you highlight that
is
important.
About 7 feet tall, easily.
Yep.
Easily 7 feet tall. I'm 5'10" and some change, 5'11" if I actually carry myself in proper posture and I'm wearing my boots.
So this thing was so fast, it essentially almost had a motion blur. Like your brain almost deleted it, like it didn't see anything, but your periphery caught that.
No, I did. I saw a bipedal shadow moving like Hollywood fast forward.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That motion blur effect, where it's like you almost don't, but you see it, and you're like, "Whoa!"
Yeah,
that's cool. He needed it, but so he's regaling us of he was living with his ex. Now this is your house, and this is happening outside your house. And
it's happening in the courtyard because we're on the second floor, so it's happening in the courtyard of the apartment building. The backyard, back courtyard.
So you managed to look for whatever reason, and you look out there, and you see
in the backyard as I always do, and I witnessed this sucker. Like I'm talking to her, I look to my left, and I say something to her, and out of my periphery, my instinct tells me look to your right. As I'm trying to look to my right, my periphery is the corner of my eye is the only thing fast enough to catch this SOB cover what had to be 50, 60 yards in 5 seconds.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
So that the speed of it is noteworthy. And
Easily.
Did anything else?
I'm a pretty decent judge of time and distance and cadence, and whatever that was, they were moving at quite the clip.
Was there anything else to that? Now, you said your wife at the time, your ex-wife, had noticed your reaction, but she didn't see anything herself. Did either of you?
All she asked me was, "You okay? Did you see something?" I was like, "Yeah, I think I just saw a shadow being."
Gotcha. So she recognized like your expression and demeanor had changed. And gotcha, of course.
Oh, so you thought you didn't even recognize. So you thought this was a shadow person, not a Bigfoot, when you first saw it.
Right.
No,
well,
I knew this was a shadow being. I haven't gotten to the Sabe big Sasquatch experiences yet.
Oh, okay.
Right. Yeah, we'll edit that portion out just because we kind of talked.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah.
And just start over, and as of here, we'll do the non-edited part. So you saw this shadow being, or perhaps a being that was a shadow being just by the fact that it was moving so fast.
Well, what led me to believe that it was a shadow being, I did a little bit of research. A lot of those beings, some of my research I've looked into, like esoteric knowledge, that they feed on negative energy. Much like a human being has to have protein, carbs, fats, etc., theirs is forms of energy, negative, positive, sorrow. They feed on certain forms of lower vibrational energy. And the apartment building me and my now ex-wife were living in was very, very, very low vibrational. Drug addicts, mentally disabled individuals who really weren't trying to get help, obese people, just a really unhealthy environment, and one might say a magnet for negative-based entities, if you will.
No, that does make sense. Now, yes,
so that's why I'm almost certain that this is was a shadow being, because each experience I've had with the Sabe Sasquatch Bigfoot has been where there's been woods for cover.
Right. Now, as somebody with a pretty extensive esoteric background, I would agree that some sorts of entities or spirits do seem to feed off of or are attracted to heightened emotions, some of them very negative, depending on their quality.
There was a lot of that there. There was a lot of that building. We actually filed for a reasonable emergency move and reasonable accommodation because it was literally driving us to the point where we were ready to self-delete, if you understand what I mean.
No, I do, and I, and I'm empathizing with you because I have been in those situations and experienced those places, and sometimes those things can attach to people, or oftentimes it's like the land or the place itself gets saturated and it becomes almost like whether a feeding ground that attracts them or a place which births them maybe is irrelevant, but I do understand what you mean. I guess it's up in the air what the identity of that being you saw was, but the fact that you saw it in that way in your peripheral, in the motion, the movement of it is fascinating. Now, how far apart? Because you saw the two
Oh, from the
people or
gnome, the
entities in
shadow.
the subway, and then the gnome. Yeah, and so I'm just trying to get a frame of your
So
journey
I
here.
saw the me and the same friend saw that gnome less than a year later. So that would have been at the very end of 2017.
Okay.
I think it was late 2018 or very early 2019. My
Okay.
my ex-wife and I, well, she saw my reaction. I witnessed the shadowing.
Okay. Fair enough. So,
My
well,
ex-wife and I
continue.
also. Go ahead. You said continue?
I said, yeah, continue. Is there anything else to that story?
No, but we did. Me and her witnessed something else in that same town.
Hit us.
Right before the lockdown.
Okay.
There's a Catholic church behind the building, kind of across the street from where we were at. We were in an area of Erie where we were living in a building that right behind it, at the back of the property on the other side of the fence, is a Goodwill and a parking lot and all that, has like a daycare. But across the street from that, there is a Catholic church, older Catholic church. Well, in the evenings, we would walk our dog around there, and we would just kind of dog can use the restroom. We can kind of enjoy ourselves, wind down, go for a couple's walk. Well, it was quite clear that night. Now, this is covered under UAE. I think no, unidentified aerial phenomenon. Let me quit using
UAP.
initial. Yeah. I honestly, in hindsight, know exactly what it was because if anybody were to say that let me quit beating around the bush. So it must have been, I think it was 9-10 o'clock at night because it had been a long day. We just wanted to walk the dog so we could use the restroom and go in for the night.
Right.
And we're just up there watching the stars, kind of just looking and really enjoying it because it was an area where there wasn't a lot of street lights, so it wouldn't, mess.
Now, is this the same location you saw the shadow being in?
To be honest, from the exact location, it was
Well, I should say, were you living in the exact location? I assume you were talking about the church, so.
Exact same town. Yeah.
Right.
And this would have been a few months later. No, this would have been a few years later because this was right before the lockdown. That's right. So this would have been 2019, I would say, sometime 2019.
Yeah, that's about right.
I'm trying to remember when the lockdowns happened specifically.
I know it's like all of us. Our whole time is oriented around, pre and post lockdown. Now that's like our new BC and AD.
Does that.
Yeah, it's like before COVID or after COVID.
Yeah, I'm almost certain it was before, so it wasn't too long ago, but long enough that
Fair enough. So you guys said you were out and you were telling us about this UAP or UFO. So you start at the beginning with that. So you were just observing, looking up at the sky.
We were just kind of talking about, just like the dog and just different things, just regular life as couples do. And we're looking up the stars, pointing at some of them, hey, that's the planet because it doesn't twinkle. And we both kind of look at the same like point almost instinctively, and we witness what looks like a star get real bright. And then if you've ever seen an episode of Star Trek or Star Wars and what the ship looks like when it jumps to hyperspace.
Oh, yeah, of course, where it just kind of like fills the whole...
We witnessed the hyperspace jump.
Oh, wow.
We witnessed the hyperspace jump.
Oh, that's fascinating.
So fast you can't even hit a stop. It's so fast you can't even clock. And the witnessing of the experience, it was over in less than 60 seconds.
That is interesting. Now, did you see any other phenomena that night in the sky?
No.
That is
Believe me,
interesting.
we waited around. We wound up staying up for like another hour.
Trying to see
we
it.
were a little sketched out, and we're like, dude, that mother effer just jumped to hyperspace. Wait a minute.
I mean, it seems, since you're in the state of mind to remember this event, do you recall your state of mind before and after that? Like, do you remember, feeling a certain way or having any physical or emotional sensations?
I was listening to a podcast that was going over secret space programs from World War II, Korean War, Desert Storm, U.S. black budget projects involving.
Oh yeah, there's a whole plethora of rabbit holes around that kind of. We'll have to do an episode about that sometime.
I was going to say, realistically, I've got information on that as well.
Well, but to your story, so
that's not my witnessing. That's just not always in the public knowledge. But yeah, that's neither here nor there. I had that experience with my wife. Then fast forward to August of 2022. Yeah, make sure I slow my brain down here. Yeah, August of 2022. We had been moved from Burien to Bothell, Washington. So decent travel. Not much, but still within the same county, King County in Washington, same one that Seattle's in. But anyway, we went from Burien to Bothell. We had moved in there December of 2021. August 2022, we gotten in some argument. Oh, I was listening to a podcast where a couple gentlemen were. Long story short, it was two masculine dudes and two feminists going back and forth, arguments and this and that and discussions, debate, if you will. And she was getting a little burnt at just me listening to it. So we got into an argument to some effect. She stormed off, went into the room to kind of, gather her thoughts. And I continued listening to this because I just found it entertaining watching four people who are supposed to be adults acting like a bunch of effing children without common sense. So I was enjoying myself.
It's often.
But
so you were listening to the podcast and she had left the room?
Yeah, she's left the room. She's gone from the living room into the main bedroom. And about 5 to maybe 15 minutes max go by. And then I notice everything is dead quiet. All I hear is the podcast, because normally there's like little bits of noise here and there. But I notice she's not making any noise in the bedroom. She's not upset, and like normally she would be. And I'm wondering, my instinct as a husband kicks in and goes, okay, what's going on? Something's off. Did I really piss my wife off here? So I go back there to check on her. And as I'm approaching the bedroom, she's got her head practically glued to the screen, because from what I can hear, she's being whooped at. We were whooped at from two separate beings.
From outside?
To be clear, where were you? Like, where were you? Were you in
Bothell, Washington? We were in downtown Bothell, Washington.
Were you in your car?
No, he was in his house. Were you in your house?
Apartment.
Yeah,
This is about 10 feet, maybe 10, 15 feet behind the back bedroom window, gentlemen.
Okay, that makes sense. Because you mentioned...
Black. It was dead quiet.
Gotcha.
It was pitch black out there, dead quiet.
So the source of these voices came from the outside.
She partially conveyed to me what she heard, because her and I heard two different things. She heard the beginning of it. I only heard the latter half of it, and what happened the moment one of my toes even crossed the bedroom threshold. It was as if it was a microphone amplification system, as if someone had literally just cut the power. The sound went cut immediately. Everything went dead quiet. So I heard what sounded like whooping, followed by, it's all in the lung capacity on whoever this was that I heard, absolutely massive. If you've ever heard of the YouTube channel Sasquatch Ontario, he opens up with a bunch of audios in each video. He has he has audios that from his different experiences with the Sabe, and these vocals are very similar to some of the ones that I've heard. Now, I'm hearing this because I'm wondering why it got quiet. I start to go check on my wife, and I hear this sound in the back, and I'm thinking my ears are playing tricks on me. I almost swore here. There's no effing way that I'm hearing what I think I'm hearing. And then as my foot, literally half my footsteps to go into the bedroom, the sound's cut off like someone just cut the power.
Mid-whoop?
So, mid-whoop. Well, mid-whoop, screaming and hollering.
Okay.
She said She said it started out as what sounded like two owls or two beings that really suck at owl sounds that had way too big of lungs, and then started to go from that to a wailing, whooping, hollering, and followed up with that sounded like the scream of a woman with a massive set of lungs.
Now that is significant.
My listeners know that I've had an encounter, probably 2020 actually, with the common owls that are really bad at being owls, or the sound of owls that just aren't being imitated well.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I know what that means.
I know they can do that. There's only two humanoid beings I know that are capable of doing that: Dogman or the Sabe.
What is it? When you keep saying the Sabe, what is that?
Sabe is the tribal name. The indigenous peoples of North America and the states, of the tribes, call Bigfoot Sabe, S-A-B-E.
Oh, okay.
They also
That'd be right.
some of the. I'm coming at it from the angle of these are not animals, gentlemen. These are an ancient race of people, human hybrid beings.
We'd probably be inclined to.
This show's about summoning Bigfoot using magic, so we're coming from the same angle.
Yeah, the angle that I've heard is if you ask the tribal peoples about their stories, here in the Pacific Northwest, they know them as the first tribe. They're multidimensional. They do have abilities. They can cloak. They can create portals. They can take you and bring you right back. They can do whatever the hell they want. But there's a catch. There's always a catch. From what I've been learning, and you can find this on Sasquatch Ontario's YouTube channel, that the Sabe are all telepathically linked, so they cannot lie. They can't lie to each other because the rest of them will know. Well, anyway, back to the experience. I got hollered at, right? Fast forward to, I'm not finished with that experience. I'm skipping around, getting a little nervous here.
It's okay. Well, let me ask
Go ahead.
To get your thoughts, just to get the setting. So you're in your house and you caught up with your wife in the bedroom. You heard these sounds and you stepped in the bedroom and all of it stopped. Now she had heard them.
The power.
Right.
We didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night, and it took about an hour for all the noise, the regular evening neighborhood noise, to come back.
Well, my question, just to get it, you were in the house and these sounds were coming from outside.
Yes, outside, 10, 15 feet max away from the back bedroom window.
Now that's interesting. Were you on the first floor?
Second floor.
That is also interesting. Would you say these sounds, or the source of these sounds, sounded like they were making these sounds just to each other in general, or do you think they were directed at you and your wife?
I think, me and my ex-wife Mary talked about this. She has expressed interest in learning about them. She had an experience on her own when she first started relapsing. She had an experience at 3 a.m. where they were literally throwing pebbles at her to keep her from going and getting one of her drug bag stashes. And
that's interesting.
She told me about it. She told me about it 3 weeks after it happened. So that experience about the few weeks after that experience she shared with me was the experience we had in August. So I asked her, I was like, was that very similar to how it felt when you had the experience with the pebbles? She went, uh-huh. I'm like, so are those what I think they are? And she goes, yes. I'm like, I'll remember this to the day I die. As soon as I realized what had just happened, it was as if someone had stole the warmth from my bones. I couldn't, no matter what, I thought about hopping in a hot shower to try to warm up. I felt like someone had just dunked me in Lake Washington in the middle of winter. The very warmth of my being was stolen from me in an instant.
That is something.
That can definitely happen.
Yep. It's your description of the Sabe from First Nation tribes falls very in line with a lot of external. That's if I had a personal definition, kind of. I don't necessarily have a set belief, but one of the beliefs on the nature of the Sasquatch is very much in line with that from research. And as you described them as more interdimensional, or it's somehow jumping between two frequencies, so to speak, and all those traits. And have you heard of the Sierra sounds? Now, I know you've done some research since these things have happened.
Sierra sounds are based in California, right?
Yeah, in the Sierra Nevada mountains.
They're pretty
popular. I spent some time there in a group home as a kid, so yeah, I'm pretty familiar with those places, that area.
Oh, that's interesting. The fact that you were kind of in that area, and then you've had, because they're, that's one of the more, I don't want to say popular, but well-known.
As a kid amongst group home kids and staff around, we were always being monitored by staff. So even if we were, the likelihood of us having an experience was probably slim to none. They didn't let us go out anywhere where you would be liable to have that experience.
Oh, no, that's fair. I didn't assume you did as a child, but I always I try to pay attention to seemingly unrelated kind of connections, even though there's no obvious or logical way. Somebody living in an area that's significant for a type of phenomena, even though they don't experience it at all, and then perhaps years later in their life, they encounter that phenomena again that has a specific relative. It's those little weird illogical connections that often pop up again and again in experience stories.
All right. So I remember we briefly talked about, I shared the experience that happened in August of last year, 2022, my ex-wife. So I'm going to roll into, it must have been at least a month before I divorced her. So it would have been November-ish. And it was a couple times, and once in October, once in November. But this was in Shoreline, Washington, which is directly, the town I'm in now is between Bothell, Washington, and Shoreline, Washington, in terms of rough location. And I've had the experience I mentioned in Bothell, but this feeling, I was going for a walk. It must have been 7, 8 at night, just to kind of get my food settled so I can wind down for the evening. My ex-wife was nowhere to be seen, nowhere to be found. And I was going for a walk, and I had this feeling, usually that when everything gets dead quiet, there's usually a predator around, or in our case, too, like how it's been described with previous people who have been on your show, it's something a bit more strange. I just had this uneasy feeling of I was being watched. It's not like negative feeling, but like my instinct, I knew I was being observed. I was around the middle of October, and then the week of Thanksgiving in November. Then fast forward to, because I didn't see anything. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. It was just dead quiet. And I just said, okay, I'm going to cut my walk short, go back to the house. I was going for a walk so I could smoke a joint and, kind of relax a little bit. Had a bit, just kind of, it was a long day. But fast forward to, a couple days, closer to 3 days ago now, because it's been a couple mornings later. I left go for a morning walk, pack my little sneaker toque that I have for people who indulge in cannabis culture. They know what that means. I don't need to elaborate.
Of course not.
And I think it was right after 5 a.m. Because I usually, I get up, I go to bed between 7:30 and 8:30 without fail, because I'm up between 3 and 4 without fail. I usually get up before witching hour starts. I just don't take chances, not with the experiences I've had lately. And it's kind of, on a more brief motivational side, it gives me a number of hours jump ahead of the world. I'm into fitness and things like that, so it gives me a head start. I can listen to motivational tapes, maybe an audio book, take my morning supplements and my meal and really just kind of really enjoy the beginning of the morning. Anyway, the experience witnessing from a few days ago was it's crazy because I didn't get this. It wasn't dead quiet like it was before. Kenmore it was a weekday. It's a weekday, so it was school day. Traffic was barely, the town was barely kind of starting to come to, cars here and there and stuff, people walking dog here and there. But it was still dark enough outside, I couldn't really see anybody. And I'm at this little dog run area that runs parallel to a power line. And if anybody who's done any research into the Sasquatch or the Bigfoot, or Sabe, as the First Nations will sometimes call them, a lot of the experiences can happen around power lines and things like that.
Of course.
Well, anywho, this experience is literally not even a quarter mile away from where I'm calling from. It's quite close to my house. In fact, it took place in the exact same protected wetlands, grasslands, swamp, if you will, that's literally right behind my apartment. It's just a number of within a quarter mile away.
Okay.
And all I saw was a set of eyes substantially larger than my own. At least about, I want to say, if I were to put I'm 5'10", so if I were to make a fist with both hands and put those fists together, the eyes would fit comfortably on either side of the outer part of my fist.
Now
that's pretty wide.
Yeah, that's a big MFer. The eyes were a yellow blue, but more blue. It is very, very. I'd only get brief glimpses. I thought I was tripping. I was like, I know I'm just having my quote wake and bake, but there's no way in hell this was laced. I'm not on drugs. There's no way. I've had my coffee. I've had my morning routine, and
so you're alert. You're good.
Oh yes, very much. So I'm and my instincts, no fear, no nothing. I didn't feel uneasy. It was almost as if all I was just thinking was, okay, I'm either tripping or I would kind of slightly sway my head to one. Yeah, how owls will kind of briefly sway their head one side to the other, kind of. I would do that just a little more to as a human would do when they're trying to look at something. What the hell is
just
that?
to get the clear shot. No, as somebody who used to get up very early.
Sure I'm not hallucinating or tripping or nothing, and I wasn't.
No, just to confirm that with you.
It was
I used to get up early to do fitness stuff, and you are people who don't do that and aren't in that regime. They're like, well, you're up early, you're half asleep. You're not. So I understand what you're saying. And when you get your coffee and you're up that early, you're probably more alert during that time than you are, being bored throughout work or the every day. And that is something, I want to confirm for the listeners.
Gentlemen, I'm more alert in that point than when my pre-workout supplement has kicked in, which has usually got caffeine, and I'm firing on all cylinders. I was more focused. That there was no external distraction. It was very quiet, very not like dead silent like the prior experiences described, but it was quiet enough, and it's got this small stream going through a portion of it. It's very nice and very relaxing. The only thing that I found uneasy was, okay, that's epic eye shine. Okay, that's not a bear, because this is usually like beaver, great blue heron territory. And it's a protected wetland. And if memory serves me right, Sasquatch are frequent in wetlands, grasslands, swamps, rivers, heavily area where they can find game and get in and out without being messed with by humans or seen by humans.
In my experience, that yes, a lot of the different facets of strange phenomena do occur in wetlands.
Yeah, according to First Nations, they have a set of rules. One of them is never be seen by humans. But as you can tell in this day and age, that is not really gonna really continue to happen.
At least it begs the.
Go ahead.
I was saying it. It suggests, because we are so populous now, and there are fewer and fewer areas where a being can hide naturally. I mean, that's true and not, but at least in Washington and places in America that aren't in the middle of the wilderness, it does suggest a lot of the ideas that have been put forth that there might be some supernatural or extra normal facet to whatever these beings are that allows them to hide or move. And as we discussed earlier in the episode, and in the original episode, the idea of speed or camouflage, or, I mean, these are all hypothetical things, but they are things that have occurred in reports in the past. Now, before you continue, I have one question about the eyes and the nature of your thing. And did you have any, was this dark out?
Yeah. It was just barely, the sky was just barely going to that like going from night to starting to slightly turn blue, slightly.
Okay. Did you have a flashlight?
No.
So were there any other light sources around? I guess what I'm asking is, would you say the light, would you say these eyes were, there were?
Yeah, there was here and there from cars. I was at the end of what, I guess the neighborhood kind of uses it as a dog run, even though it's not really a dog run. It's like a pipeline, fence line, electric power line kind of thing but a lot of people in the neighborhood take their dogs just to kind of go run and play there. So it doesn't need to be lit, but it's about where I was standing was, I want to say 80 to 90 yards away from the sidewalk.
Fair enough. I guess what I was leading at was, in your opinion, would you say those eyes were reflective or self-luminous? Like, do you think they were making light on their own, or they were just reflecting like an animal?
Respectfully speaking, I'm speaking on pure instinct, not just the experience. I think it was a bit of both. Something tells me, something innately in me is saying both. Like, it's practically screaming in my head. It was
Fair enough.
Both. Yeah, because it's like, okay, headlights would show it, but then there's no headlights. Wait a minute, why am I still able to see
But you're still seeing it. No, that is interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I'm not sure. I believe some animals might be able to kind of take that light a little bit in their eyes and it might stay, but don't quote me, and that might be inaccurate.
Yeah.
But it's just something, when we're talking about these things, it's good to know. What's that?
I've heard Sasquatch can literally light up their own eyes, though. At least some encounters have been described as they seem to be lit from within.
Correct. And there are many, many reports.
Just out of curiosity,
yeah.
Have you listened to Strange Familiars or are familiar with Timothy Renner and his books, Where the Footprints End?
No, I'm not.
I would highly recommend you check those out. I think you'd find them very interesting. He has a whole bit on eye shine and the difference between eye shine and eye glow. And his perspective is very interesting. Just the fact that what people experience with Bigfoot is physically impossible when it comes to the eye shine with a naturally occurring animal. It just can't.
Yeah, exactly. You're right about that. There's a distinct difference. Most people would assume it's eye shine because they don't know the difference.
Correct. And that is something, because that's what I was getting at in my question. And there are some reports where there is no self-luminosity to the eyes, but there are many. And not just in Sasquatch or Bigfoot reports, but other phenomena as well that suggest that. Like, speaking of, things like the Mothman. And not just that, but in many encounters. And it's one of my favorite things to... Yes, and I always like to ask because not to say I can give you a definite on these type of beings versus those types of beings, but there does seem to be a distinction, and that might be a clue to give us some information on the nature of what we're observing. So that's why I asked. But anyway, we sidetracked. Is there anything else to your experience here you would like to mention?
No, the only thing I can remember distinctly at the end of witnessing that is I'm walking away. Then my instinct to get the hell out of there kicks in, which makes no sense. Makes no effing sense. It's like, so me, it's just like, okay, so now you get paranoid after everything's fine. Man, just go home and chill. So yeah, that's all it really was.
That's fair.
Yeah, seriously, it's really little delayed reaction much.
Well, this is in at least two of your accounts. You do mention that instinctual, almost paranoia and fear to flee, like that urge to get the hell out.
Oh yeah.
I want to dig into it just with a question. You remember the situation fairly well, as you said. Do you think it's possible that, or I'm going to say it's possible, or do you think that was associated or could have been associated with the entity you saw itself or the phenomena itself? Or do you think it was just your nature, like, it just kicked in that you saw something weird and your fight or flight kicked in? Or because I remember you did mention that with your encounter in the apartment with your ex-wife, I believe.
Yeah, and, once I realized it happened, very warmth was stolen from my bones.
Right, and it's just something to consider, and I wanted to ask you about. Now that's a good distinction where you felt normal and then you didn't, like after the event, then you had that sudden onset.
I was almost back to the sidewalk, believe it or not, gentlemen. I was like 15 yards from the sidewalk. That's not far away. And then that kicks in. Yeah, it makes no sense. Unless the entity, which has been described, Sasquatch, have the ability to do that. They can give you a calming effect or a immediate fear, get the hell out of there sensation.
And that is why I did bring it up. I just wanted to hear your thoughts.
That's also a common feature in a lot of goetic spirits, is that for some reason during evocations, magicians can feel this very sudden feeling of obvious fear, but also very strange, calming, tranquil feelings before the spirit shows up. So that's an interesting parallel.
And to tack on that, there's endless accounts of encounters with UFOs and their occupants, which also fall into that territory. The sense that whatever the phenomena is or the entities that they're witnessing have some ability to manipulate the instincts or the mind or physiological or psychosomatic or whatever it may be, essentially where people are stricken with either intense calm or intense terror on an almost instinctual level. And what I find interesting is the generated quality of this, like the manufactured source of that fear versus a more natural sense. It's interesting to talk about, and you're describing it happening not long ago. This was, you said, like 3 days ago?
Yeah, almost 3 mornings ago.
Wild. 3 mornings, that's wild. So listeners, remember, what were you doing 3 days ago?
I've barely been living in Kenmore for a little more than a month, so yeah.
That's awesome.
That's interesting.
So is that all the encounters you wanted to talk about tonight?
That's actually all the encounters I've had up to this point.
Okay, cool. So can we ask you a couple questions just about different ones?
Oh, sure. Let's see what we can do, gentlemen.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you about the gnome.
I thought so.
When you said it ran, you said it looked very inhuman the way it ran.
Yeah, it's almost like do you know what a waddle looks like if you were to press fast forward, like on the old VCR?
Yeah.
That's exactly what it looked like.
Okay.
And he didn't act startled when he saw us. It was almost like as if you're turning and looking left and right before you cross the street, and you just happen to look left and go, oh, I don't want to look at that anymore, and then promptly cross the street. That's exactly like it was. It didn't startle, or I don't even know if it was. I'm assuming it was a male because I didn't see any female protrusion from the chest area.
Okay, but you did say it had white hair?
It had a beard. Yeah, it had a beard.
Okay, and
so that's kind of if it's a male.
Would you say that the way it walked or the way it moved was like it was gliding?
No. I could
Okay.
tell this sucker was plain waddling very, very fast.
Okay. Very interesting. And what was your friend's reaction? Like as it was happening? Do you remember if he said anything or?
We're looking at each other and saying the same thing. That's a no. That's a no. No, it's not. Yeah, it is. We're as you do when you have experiences. You want to accept it, but you want to deny it. But you want to accept it, but you want to deny it. You see the weird, the brain suddenly, the two hemispheres of the brain want to suddenly go war with each other.
Yeah, I can understand that absolutely. Yeah, that is such a fascinating story that you were able to see that.
Yeah, we weren't looking for it either. That was one of those. It's like that's usually the case with anybody who's a member of the Club of No Return. If you've had a Sasquatch witness, or something to that effect, you're a member of the Club of No Return. And almost all of us never asked to be a part of the club.
Right. Yeah. And the shadow person, I mean, what is it that you actually saw? Like, what can you tell me about what you saw with your own eyes?
What I could see was about 7 feet tall, quite thin, just a very almost staticky like outline, and blacker than the blackest black.
Okay, so like blacker than the night itself.
Yes.
Okay.
Blacker than like if you've ever been in if you've ever been camping or in a room where it's so black you can't see your hand in front of your face.
Mm-hmm.
Like that.
Okay. And did it? And you just said it walked.
Now, the back courtyard was lit up. So for it to be able to produce that when everything around it is lit up is what also was a way of getting my attention.
Yeah, I'm sure. It was probably that's really interesting. It probably looked very unnatural with the lighting, everything lit up, and then this thing is just blacker than black. Did you remember in any of these accounts, whether it be the gnome, the shadow person, the Bigfoot, anything like that, did you have any notable dreams after these occurrences, or maybe even before these occurrences?
No, but I have been, but usually, I mean, I do it more often than I'm willing to admit, but I guess why not? I do a fair amount of listening to podcasts that have to do with various forms of cryptozoology and different spirit beings, non-corporeal beings, various multidimensional beings, if you will.
Same. That's all I listen to as well.
Yeah, well, I'm assuming the more you listen to that, it has a tendency to may draw those kind of experiences to you. And now I'm purely assuming because I'm a new guy. I'm a new guy in researching all this since I decided to stop being so scared and start taking the experiences seriously. I'm also coming at it from the way the First Nations have decided to look, treat this with respect, and you may have better experiences, or the experiences may stop.
Mm-hmm.
I take a similar approach and respect.
I think that's the magic approach.
Well,
yeah, I'm not
certain cultures.
I don't mind having more experiences, but I want the entities to know that I'm aware of them. I mean them no harm, and they're not going to be able to harm me like they think.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much the entirety of what I'm trying to do with this show. It's talking about interacting, using magic to interact with these beings and build a relationship, so that way you can communicate with them on an even keel and not be in a position of submission when experiencing them. So yeah, I definitely understand what you're talking about.
That's an important thing for me as well, and that's something I've always kept dear to my heart, and lessons from the universe, so to speak, have taught me the importance of standing up for yourself and keeping your sovereignty in mind when encountering anything out there. That you are a person you have power unto yourself. That's an important thing to remember, but it's also important to remember to have respect. And, certain cultures here have never lost the art of it, though a lot of parts of Western cultures as we find ourselves in, compared to many of the First Nation peoples have forgotten that respect, along with uh, their idea of the validity of the phenomena at all. But many people around the world have and still do. This phenomena is a part of their everyday lives. And
Yeah, exactly. And it's been that way for generations in their family, or say it's in a country overseas somewhere. And it's just a normal part of their culture. That's what
Yep.
confuses me and fascinates me at the same time. Why is it Western civilization are the only ones trying to ignore it, rebrand it, or sweep it under the rug? And
likely
yet
it's control.
it's a massive hotbed. It's a massive hotbed for experiences.
Yep.
Once we
likely it's-
adopted materialism and materialist mindset and sort of the dogmatic scientific aspect, we pushed everything that wasn't easily explainable to the very back of our brains, whereas other cultures, they didn't have to do that, and so it's still very much a part of their overall culture, and there's no kind of taboo around it, and so they're much more advanced than us in a lot of ways, and that being a very particular one.
Okay, that makes sense. Huh.
Yeah, I would agree.
Do you have any other questions for me, gentlemen? Because I gotta get eaten here soon.
Oh no, it was wonderful to talk to you, and I
Yeah,
hope we can
absolutely.
remain in touch. I personally would love to keep in correspondences and get your thoughts on some stuff that's specific to Washington and the Pacific Northwest.
And if you have
It's
any
one of the
other
most-
weird encounters, we would love to have you back on.
Oh, I will definitely be saving your guys' number for any more experiences I have.
Yeah.
And in terms of what one of you was saying, it's like, because I am going to continue to do research on this stuff and see, what dots connect to what. Because I've been doing solidly since researching all of this since 2018. And the dot connectors is, oh boy.
It's a rabbit hole, isn't it? No,
All right,
you're
Andrew.
fine.
Well, thank
It's
you.
a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, it really was. Thank you for coming on and telling your stories. We really appreciate it. We can't wait to have you again on, on again when you have more stuff to share.
Yeah, and if we ever
I'm looking forward to it, gentlemen.
if we do an episode on deep dive conspiracy stuff and things we're not supposed to know that's related to things like shadow governments and hidden history,
We'll definitely
call
give you
you.
a call.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely call me.
Absolutely.
I know after I share that, gentlemen, I'm probably going to get told to sign an NDA. I don't care. I'll sign the NDA after they come knock on my door.
Octavian has your contact information, and I'm going to have him send it over for me. And I'm Ian, of course. And you'll find me as Nick's Hollow, of some variation of Nick's Hollow online. So you might get a message from me with some follow-up, if that's all right.
That sounds wonderful, gentlemen.
All right. Well, have a wonderful night.
Have a good night.
It was an absolute honor, you guys. Thank you. Have a wonderful night.
You too.
All right. So that was our episode with Andrew the Wanderer. He had a lot of interesting stories to tell. What did you think?
I thought he was really interesting. I thought that the things he's experienced are very rare, and he's very lucky for having experienced as many things as he has. There's a lot of interesting aspects to his story, especially the fact that he was in a very liminal lifestyle when a lot of these accounts occurred.
I'd agree to that. Now, I think his encounter and story about that gnome was probably the most compelling. All of his stories had a compelling element for me. And many of them shared many patterns with other witness encounter reports that I've read. I've read 1,000 by now. There were many elements that were common, and we can get into that. But what did you think about the gnome?
I thought the gnome was really cool. I think that it's a very rare. You don't really hear about that. You don't hear people talking about seeing gnomes just out and about in the city or in a neighborhood or anything like that. It's it was just it kind of took me by surprise. I wasn't expecting him to say that he saw a gnome in the middle of Washington State in the city.
Neither
in
did
Seattle,
I. And I can't help but think about the episode of 6 Degrees of John Keel, I believe might have been the first episode, where the lovely ladies on that podcast are talking about the story of the construction worker
who comes across the little man.
And
he's
that was
grumpy.
To sum it up for the listeners. The guy's on a backhoe and he's digging a hole and on a job for, I suppose, the property owner, and he's dumping dirt He's dug this big hole with his backhoe, and he dumps another pile of dirt on a big pile of dirt, and he looks over, and he sees this very grumpy-looking little man, half buried in the dirt, just scowling at him. And he describes it as kind of a little man with gnarled, dirty, kind of brownish skin, and I think he was wearing a hat, and that wasn't, of course, the only gnomish story that I think we've read about, at least, but it is interesting in that I can't say that I've ever had a personal sighting of
Me
that
neither.
sort of being, but peripherally, I can tell you a weird story I had with a pendulum in Salem, Massachusetts that's maybe relevant.
Okay.
So I was in Salem a few years ago, and it was right when I had gotten my pendulum, who is named Amethyst, who, I like my pendulum quite a bit, and she's a big part of my practice. We've mentioned on the podcast before, but when I was practicing with her, I was in one of the magic shops in Salem. It was I can't remember the name of it, and they had, a huge rack of pendulums, and I was checking them out, and I was chatting with a nice gentleman behind the counter about, magic and, what it was like to work at the shop. But they had the whole place decorated. In the front of it, they had kind of in the window a whole setup of, I can't remember, but there's like which term, but kind of like a brooms and just all kinds of like decorations. But among them, there was a whole placement of had to be a dozen different gnomes and gnome-like beings, and they're a certain kind. They weren't actually called a gnome, but it's a European spirit, and I'll have to think about what it is. They have a certain name, but they look kind of like David the Gnome, but their hats come over their eyes, and you can see their nose poking out from beneath the big pointed red hat, and they have beards, and they look like gnomes, essentially, but they're kind of like trickster fairies. And I remember I had my pendulum out, and we were kind of doing some conversational things, and I was really big on being conversational with the pendulum as part of my practice with it and building up the spirit that dwells within kind of her ability. And I had purchased something from the shop, and I said, all right, Amethyst, point me something here that you like. So she pointed over, and I followed the pendulum, and she pointed straight at one of these little gnome creatures. And if you ever used a pendulum for any amount of time, you can know that sometimes they can be excitable. They can move very quickly, and if you use them, then you'll know what I mean by they can get very excitable. And she just seemed so fascinated by this little gnome-like creature, and honestly, it looked very much like, and this was not a real gnome, it was something that was stuffed and created, but they were apparently magically charged or blessed in some sort, because they were pagans that had the shop, and witches, I suppose. But ever since when he was telling the story, it reminded me of that, because it looked very identical. And next time we have an episode where you have the time to do it, I'm going to research and pull up my research on that particular gnome-like spirit. Because after that, I did some research and found out it had a name and a specific nature, and they were specifically earth elementals. Now, for listeners, gnomes are often considered a race of earth elemental beings. In fact, in ceremonial magic, earth elementals themselves are referred to generally as gnomes. Now, have you heard any other stories that feature gnomes? I feel like maybe we should do an entire episode on gnomes.
I would love to do an episode about gnomes. I found this whole really weird TikTok subgenre about, it's like gnome core, and it's just about the belief in gnomes.
All right, I have, we can edit this part out, but there is a specific UFO story that is fucking relevant to this. I wish I could remember the guy's name. Maybe we'll have to call back and we'll have to record it. But I feel like it would be a really good addition to this episode if we split it into two. And we don't have to put what I'm saying right now in it, but I'm speculating. And basically, this guy had an abduction experience, and he woke up in this craft or space or room that had looked like it was stonework. Like he was almost in like a stoneworked room with these alcoves. These alcoves had bodies in them, like corpses, like preserved corpses of people. And these squat, hairy men with wrinkly, dark, earthen skin and wiry beards and like coal black eyes, dressed almost like medieval dwarves. Like I guess they had like leather clothing on or armor or something like that. Yeah, we're both dwarves. But they were speaking in this guttural, kind of gruff, guttural language. He described him as like an old man, like with a very gravelly voice in this gibberish. And they were like poking him and trying to, but the whole encounter is fascinating. And I think I know where it is. I just got to figure out exactly.
Have you ever watched the documentary about the Bridgewater Triangle in Massachusetts?
Yes, I have. And actually that popped up too.
So you know the story about the guy walking his dog and the Pukwudgie comes out and says, "E want you, E want you," and he thinks that he was saying like, "We want you," and it had like a very weird voice. That's what that reminded me of.
Andrew's accounts were fascinating.
Yes.
What did you think about the whooping sounds, the presences he heard with his ex?
I've heard a whoop or two in my lifetime in Pennsylvania, never in Maryland, but in Pennsylvania. And it's a very, very distinct sound. You just cannot really mistake it. And I know that people say like, oh, it could be people. And yeah, like from a very technical standpoint, it could be people. But when you really listen to it and you experience it firsthand, the idea of it being people it gets slimmer and slimmer and slimmer every time you hear it.
Yeah. And I think there's the
idea that everything just stopped dead as soon as he walked into the room. That's a very interesting point that we didn't really talk about too much. And
but
it didn't really strike. Yeah, it's very important because that wouldn't just happen if it was a natural animal. There's some sort of a mechanism or an intelligence.
It's something. Because how many stories have we read and gone over and heard that you have normal forest sounds or normal environmental sounds going about as they do, and then suddenly, as a precursor to a greater encounter, everything is dead quiet, not sounds, not wind, not voices, nothing. In fact, we had a moment that could be considered that when we were at Gazoo's.
Yes, we did.
When we went up the hill, and now this is, for our listeners, something you're going to be able to participate and hear all about in an upcoming episode, where we have done, we did a live episode, and we are nearly at the point of releasing it for you, where we encounter and explore the area known as Gazoo's, which Frater Graves has been to many times, and I had not, but so... We'll continue it on that episode. But yeah, definitely there was that moment where we experienced a profound and very noticeable silence that occurred right when things began to get a little weird.
Yes, and I have experienced that before, and it is a very eerie and strange feeling, and it's an unmistakable feeling. You will never feel that and wonder what it is that's going on. It's very, very... Yeah. Specific. So I think we made a lot of good coverage here, and I really enjoyed having Andrew on. I hope he comes on again if he has anything else to say or any other stories to share. And as always, everybody, we will see you again on the Strange Dominions.
Have a great night.